Fantastic. Pame, I'm so happy to have you on the podcast again.
I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love chatting with you. Like,
Yeah.
I
And
feel like I'm always like, oh, we could do this all day.
yeah, because this is something that, when we're talking about how trauma, like have a real conversation about trauma, how it shows up in your business, but it really is much broader than that, right? Because you and I are both leadership coaches. So it's really like about how you show up and how trauma shows up in your showing up.
Yeah.
Yeah, whether it's in your love relationships, in your parenting, in your family. But we're focusing the conversation today about business and leadership. But for the people listening, it's broader than that. But we're just gonna sort of like keep it a little bit narrower, just because we're gonna be doing our 3-month business incubator harmonize. And this is part of the conversation that we want to share with people. um yeah, so I'm so
Yeah.
glad you're here for
And,
it.
and I think it was you that said this like years ago. And it was like, everything in our life is relationships, like whether
Yeah,
it's with your clients, with your boss, with your partners, with your kids, it's all about relationships. And there's so much that affects how we show up in relationships, which affects all of those things. And it was just like a kind of like a mind-blowing moment for me, because for me personally, I can, I've had to do a lot of work in how I show up to relationships, which would have altered like the course of my business, career, everything.
yeah. And when we think about like where like we were continually moving out of bro toxic models of how we do business, the more we move out of that, the more it really is about relationships and collaborations. And right, that is all relationships, like not just with your clients, but even in the sales process, right? Like having a consensual sales process. And when we think about like decolonizing your business, it just really comes back to relatedness, right? Like your relationships, your capacity to be intimate with your business, your capacity to be real with your clients, right? And to honor like all the emotional stuff that comes up as part of the process of connecting more deeply, sharing yourself more, being more visible. That's
Yeah.
all going to touch into the places.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I've watched myself go from extremes, right? From like when I quit my career, I was a project manager at an app development company. And so
Yeah.
it was kind of my job to be like, this is the contract. We had like one extra conversation. We're gonna have to charge you for that. This person looked at your website for 1 minute longer. I need to jot that down. It was all about like keeping things in line. So
Yeah.
when I started my business, it was very much from that same headspace of like, here's the contract. Anything outside of this is, a change order. And it was like very like rigid and strict because that's the way that I had been trained.
Yes.
And it was like, so that was one extreme, which of course it's like a little bit jarring when you're like working with a person, right? Especially somebody with like, I feel like as bubbly of a personality as I have. The minute we get into business, I'm like, or I was that way, right? And then to going to like the other extreme, which is like, no, everything can go, like, yes, whatever. No, I'm not going to charge you. Of course, this is just a conversation, it's like, and just giving, 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 giving.
Yeah.
And both of those places felt safe in some way. What's actually the harder piece is being in the middle, being like, I am in relationship with you. And I'm finding myself wanting to be like really strict and keep to the contract, and it's just like this fluid relationship.
Yes. Then that middle place is like relational and boundaried,
Yes.
right? Where you're needing to hold the space or hold the container for that conversation and really like, wow, yeah, that's huge. The way that you just painted that felt really it feels very different in my body. Yeah, just having it be the middle is right, like not not super rigid and not loosey goosey, but having this like these healthy boundaries that really like allow people to be them and allows you to be you, right? Because that's what boundaries serve. Like we can bring our needs, we can share our truth, right? And have those two, have them all there in that relationship.
Yeah, and it requires a lot of self-trust, because even as we think about like business, right, there's this like there's this idea of like, here's the framework, here's the formula, here's what you do, follow these steps perfectly, right? That's
Yes.
like one
Yes.
side of it.
Yeah.
And then the other side is all like, no, all intuition, all like, I'll just do it when I feel like it, I never have to do anything hard. And it's, for me, it's easy to be in either of those places. What has taken a lot of work is finding the middle. Like, oh,
Yeah.
this is a structure that's helpful, I'm actually going to take this. This is hard and I know I have to do it. Or like, screw this, I'm listening to my intuition on this one. It just requires a lot of trusting yourself.
You're so right. You're so right, because, you know, even when you and I started working together, I remember sharing with you, like, you have really good structures. Like, you're a really good person for structure. And you came up with all these Excel sheets. And I started, like, I felt myself having a panic attack because I grew up with a shit ton of structure. I came from like military family. So like my response has been no structure or very little structure, to have like a lot of flow and creativity. And you know what? I do have that. And right, it's like it's the marrying the two, is having like harmonics, right? Having enough structure, right, where that intuition and that creativity can flow, right? Because it's like, yeah, any in either direction, it's out of balance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you said that. Yeah, and a lot of the feminine business models, right, are all about like intuition and flow and like, you know, I don't even have a sales page. And you know what? Like, do that if that feels good to you. If that what works, that's what works for you, go
Yeah.
do it. I know that for most people, myself included, there has to be a little, like there has to be an internal balance, right?
Yeah, and I think also often like that advice comes from a place of privilege. Often I'm watching coaches who say that kind of stuff already have an audience or already have a business. So they're at the stage where they can have a little bit more fun. But
Yes.
when you're first starting out and you're first building, it's like you need a sales page. People are confused about that you're selling something. We need
Right.
a way to show them that you're selling something and what it is. Um, and so, yeah, it's interesting because as I think about Harmonize, our 3-month business incubator, I haven't talked a lot about, you know, the structures piece of it. Like we don't really talk about a lot about it,
Yeah.
uh, but it's because the muscle that we're inviting people to flex is this like, sure, you want to talk about a sales page structure, we can do that, but how do you flex that self-trust muscle, that
Mm.
intuition muscle, to be like, what do I need? um,
Yes.
does it need to be exactly that? Can I take a piece of this? Like, how can I be in my own version of the middle between the structure and the completely unstructured, and show up, in a more powerful way?
Hmm. Yeah, and that question that you said, asking yourself what you need, is like such a powerful question. And it's such a simple question, but if you continue to ask it, if you continue to be in that inquiry of what is it that I need, everything that's out there is going to become sort of like extra. And it's really going to come down to, I need to build more space for rest, or I, because of my particular body, right? I need to build space for creative time because of my neurodiversity, right? Or I need to create more space for, I don't know what, because of my human design, right? It can, for whatever reason, the needs or like I need to build a lot of space to process emotions, because I have a lot of emotions and I have them very deeply. So that like a lot of the bulk of my work is really like on managing my emotions, you know? Yeah. So that question, what do I need? What do I need? What do I need? And coming back to that over and over again really designs in a way your business.
And being really honest, because to me, I need a lot of time to deal with my anxiety. you know, like there are
Yeah.
some days when I wake up very anxious and I know that's not a good place to work from. So it's like I may need 3 or 4 hours of journaling and taking care of myself, maybe taking a shower, even if I don't need a shower, whatever it is to
Yeah.
shift that state.
Yeah.
Um, but also it's like being honest, because sometimes to my anxiety, it feels really good to do something that's not actually like that's soothing in a way that's not actually helping me move forward, you know?
Like more it's like a distraction, like a
Yes.
yeah, like a
Yes.
long-term distraction, because distraction is an important skill in trauma, like to be like, okay, well, I'm going to shift my attention here for a minute, but you come back to it. But there's the distraction where we're like, oh, I'm going to be on my phone for a long time and doing all that. Yeah, that kind of distraction.
Yeah. Or even like, I'm going to work on my website, which is a totally productive thing. But it's like, is this really going to help me like move the needle?
Yeah,
Or should I just get off the computer and wait for my anxiety to go away
right.
and then come back and
Right, because
decide?
we can get lost in those little tasks, right? In the menial tasks that our brains think like, oh yeah, like let me just focus on this and I'll feel better. But it's actually not, like you said, helping us move the needle, or not moving the feelings or having us be with them in a way that is actually ultimately productive to the business.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh. So yeah, so for me, like for you, it's anxiety. For me, it's just like my emotions are more like I just have like a lot of feelings. Like I wake up in the morning, it's anxiety, but it's more like I need to clean the vessel. I need to like empty the vessel, is because like overnight I feel like I fill up, and then I need to like empty it out so that I can just like receive. Like it really is for me, like moving my body is so that I can like receive, so it holds space, but also receive intuition, like intuitive hits, right? Yeah, yeah. And for whatever reason, like I'm also thinking about, we talked about briefly about the sales process and having um, a sales process that is intimate, that is connected, that allows people to like honors people's sovereignty, but also is boundary. Like we're not going to keep this container open forever, and we're like honoring people's yeses and nos. Right? I feel like when we enter like sales calls, for example, right? Because you're in a business, you're going to sell things, right? We have to work through our feelings around selling. But then there's also like when you and I did this we did this event of backing yourself, and sometimes on sales calls we don't back ourselves because we have some doubts about our offer, right? We're not fully like 100% behind it. We kind of we like it, but we're not sure if we love it, or we don't have like that faith and trust you were talking about. And so that's going to show up on the sales call, and then you're going to be like, oh, if you don't want it, okay, I'll back off, instead of entering then the conversation of like curiosity. So what's happening right now that you're wanting to say no? And it's not that you want to convince the person to say yes, but you want to be genuinely curious about what the hesitation is, because you want to meet the person there. And you also want to get curious about like, maybe it's something about how you're talking about your offer that is not right, really pulling people in. So that curiosity is really important.
Yeah. And I think also like that having yourself, something I've noticed with myself in the past is when I was like really anxious about making money, it
Yeah.
just puts this really weird pressure on any sort of conversation that you're having.
Yes.
um and so once I like let go of that, it was like we're just connecting, like and
Yeah.
I am very like upfront, like I'm like I'm a fan of having everything on the sales page, the cost, everything, so that when people are hopping on a call with me, they know what they're walking into, and
Yes.
it's not like a surprise,
Yes.
because that doesn't feel good to me.
Yeah. 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 Because then there's some sort of manipulative aspect that inevitably comes in, that is like, right, the pressure to make money, then it's like there is this like, oh, I really need you to say yes, right? That the iffy energy, like this uncomfortable kind of like energy in the space that really, I'm going to be a judgmental bitch and say shouldn't be there, and sometimes is, but it can also be named, right? I think that, in the spirit of transparency, as you shared about the sales page, and in the spirit of radical honesty, right? And intimacy is saying like, yes, there's a part of me that feels like I really want you to be in the container. I really want you to be in there. And, I have a feeling of da 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 da. And sometimes that can just acknowledge it. You can acknowledge it for yourself, or if you're with somebody who you have some familiarity with, then you can bring it in the space and be like, okay, there, I said it, it's done. It's, cat's out of the bag, and then your nervous system can settle and you can get to the sales call in the way that feels congruent. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, like, not even just about, it is related to sales, but when we're so desperately trying to mold ourselves or our offer or the conversation into something that is going to be desired, like in my experience, it always backfires. Like those are always the clients that I've had issues with, or that, so
Yes.
I'm very much in the like, I'm not here to convince anybody. Like
Yeah.
you have felt my vibe, you have seen my stuff. Like this is just really for logistical
Yeah.
questions. And yeah, because I did a year, it was a year like sales training, because I was like, I got convinced that, I could make money wherever I want if I went into the sales training program.
Ah.
And the person that did the sales training program was like a top, like sales was her whole life, right? So I learned a formula for how you have these conversations, and
Yes.
and where do you poke and where do you prod, and like where do you gather data that then you can be like, oh, you told me that you really want to move to Mexico. What would it be like if you did? And what happens if you don't? And exactly how to
Yes.
say it.
Yes.
Um, and it works. It does. It's manipulative and it works. But it doesn't feel good. And it's
Yeah.
actually in that program. That program had a mindset component too, where we had mindset coaching, and we were taught like, I'm giving you this formula that works. If you don't want to do it, it's your mindset. And you just need to come to the mindset coaching call to like make yourself do it. And
Yes.
I ended up like, after a year of being in that program, I ended up feeling like shit, because I was like, my mindset is broken. Like somehow all these other like, doing finger quotes, like boss babes are in here, and they're like, having 10K months and, really like figuring it out. And somehow I keep doing the same thing and it's just like not working. And so it made me like very, and for me, the reason why is because I had a lot of trauma that I needed to work through, and a sales coaching container was not the place to do that.
Yeah.
Also human design. I learned a lot, about human
Yeah.
design in that process. But yeah, it's, it comes back to this like being in this middle space of like trusting yourself and
Yeah.
being like, oh, okay, cool. I had no idea what what a sales call conversation should look like. Now I know. Here are the parts of it that feel good to me, and here are the parts that feel like manipulative and gross, and that I'm just
Right.
not going to do.
Right. Yeah. And that's wonderful, because you have to like, yes, you have this structure, right? That isn't 100% for you. And you ask yourself, what is it do I need? I need it to feel a certain way, or I'm uncomfortable with that, right? All of that is self-referencing, and asking yourself what would feel good for you to then tweak it and change it, right? So that you can step into that conversation with like, right, like your nervous system is settled, because you're not there to convince anybody, you're not there to do logistics, or explain like pricing and this and that. You're just there to like hold the space for the person in their decision making process.
Yep.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
is
Not
so
to convince, just to help them
yeah.
realize if it's a yes or a no.
Right. Yeah. And answer those basic questions like, is this a right fit for you? And to honor the no, right? Or to tell them it's a no if you really don't think it's going to be a fit for them.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, this is so good. This is so good. I feel like I also want to talk about marketing. Um because I know that for myself, it has been challenging for me to convey my value, convey like why you want to work with me. Why do you want to work with me? And I think that a lot of times, I think that in the spiritual world, I just, I came from my core energetics weekend. A lot of what I notice, even in the core energetics community, which I love, is like there's a shaming of ego,
Mm,
right? And I can proudly say that I have a lot of ego. It's not always awesome because my ego is shadowy. Like I can be just like a not nice person. And you need to have healthy ego to be an entrepreneur and to put yourself out there and to really talk about yourself in a way that is, like you say, sharing your stories and then conveying your value and saying, this is why you want to work with me. Like that energy, this is why you want to work with me. That takes a lot of healthy ego that a lot of people in spiritual communities, people who do healing work, people who do self work, that's a place where I feel a lot of people pull back.
and activism too. Like
Yeah.
my activists, my social justice people, like where you're taught to not, it's not about you.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And, in a way, it's not, right? It's like it is about the person, it's about centering the person that you're talking to, your audience. And at the same time, you have to also convey your value, right? And sometimes it's because we've learned not to value ourselves, right? Because what we do feels easy to us. And so we're kind of like, is it really that special? This is the person that needs it. It is. And we need to get really specific about like how it's going to work for them or how it's worked for you. If sharing your story feels easier, this is how it worked for you, right? And that's doesn't mean that it's a formula that's going to work for somebody else, but maybe it might work for some people. you know
Yeah.
yeah.
I have a lot of thoughts. I'm like trying to organize them. I mean, I will say, just from like an astrology, human design perspective, there are some of us who, and I'm putting myself in this category,
Yeah.
like it is easier for me to be vulnerable and it is easier for me to be seen, right? Like I have my son in the first house of self. Like I like to be seen. I like to, I'm a
Yeah.
Taurus. And same in, in human design, I have my identity center connected to my throat. And so
Yeah.
when I speak, I'm sharing my truth. It's like very easy for me to be vulnerable,
Yeah.
right? And so I do want to acknowledge that because depending on how your makeup is, it is a bit easier for some people and
Yeah.
it can be a little bit harder for other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is okay. All of us have our unique magic that is meant to be shown and felt in different ways. But I think sometimes people see people like me who is like just okay with being on the internet and they're like, I could never do that. And it's like, well, part of it is innate. I do feel like it's part of how I'm wired. And part of that I had to learn how to do. And even then, sometimes when I get too much attention, I'm like, whoop, like that was too much. I'm like, I can feel myself like pulling back, right?
Yeah.
Because that's the
Yeah.
piece that I'm like still working on. Um, and then the other thing is that like, I think this is the part that's tricky is that creating content for your business is a skill.
Mm.
And the only way you build a skill is by practicing. And
Yes.
so I'm always like, yes, just make a lot of content. And then once you're in the practice of like making a lot of content, then I'm like, okay, now we can get strategic with it. But
Yeah.
at first you got to open the floodgates or whatever. You got to open the water, let
Yeah.
it come out. And it's not going to be that. And what I see is, I see people get stuck in the like, just like letting it flow out way,
Yeah.
or in the like, no, I can't because it's not perfect way. But
Yes.
it really is like a process, you
Mhm.
know? I mean, it's the same with yoga. Like, if I'm not going to go straight from like not doing yoga to doing a handstand or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
going to go to some of the beginner yoga classes for a while, and I'm going to show up before I get to that point.
Yeah.
And it's the same with like being vulnerable online, talking strategically about your offers. Sometimes it takes like you having to like, and I know this is the case for me, like the more that I explain it, the more I'm like, oh, I think I get what I'm selling now, because I'm explaining it in 17 ways. And so now I've gotten better at this, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yes. And using your hose analogy, like I like that because it really provides a nice visual. It's like when you turn on the hose and it's not been on for a while, like the water comes out like, right? It's all kind of like spluttering all over the place. And then it takes some time, like you said, to get into the flow. For me, like honestly, you know, with the right people, I feel very comfortable being vulnerable. Online, it is fucking hard for me to be vulnerable. I come from an academic background. Like I come from scientific writing. It is hard for me. Like I learned to sort of use this artificial and disembodied voice in my writing, and it still worked for me to like really like connect in my writing because I've not learned to do it that way. So that's still a challenge for me, and I'm, like I'm in the process of like practicing that. I'm also practicing like, okay, well, how do I talk when I talk to my friends?
yes.
And I curse a lot, and it's okay, so I'm going to curse more in my writing. And and then it's like, oh, is that really spiritual? And is that trauma sensitive? All of that stuff, like all of these stories about like how I should do it, how, right, all of the perfectionism and the idealized self-image as a business person comes in, right? Our socialization, our conditioning, what business looks like, all of that shit comes into.
Yeah. The way I see it is that anything that we do that is causing us to not learn to trust ourselves more is not helpful.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
like it should always be helping you build up that trust. Otherwise, it's it's doing more damage, right?
Yeah, it actually erodes the self-trust.
Yeah. And so, and that's not to say that we won't feel like uncomfortable like doing things. Sometimes it is through the discomfort that we develop that self-trust.
Yes. Yeah.
um but yeah, it's so anytime I'm like finding myself like trying to like fit in a box, and I'm like, wait, this is causing me to not trust myself.
Yeah.
This is causing me to add more questions rather than like, security.
Yes. Yes. And it's like you said, growth and stretching your visibility muscle or your sales muscle or your marketing muscle or even your expression muscle. I'm really passionate about self-expression, like having all sides of your personality come through. If you are somebody who posts on social media, or even if you just nurture your email list, can you really show up with all of your parts, right? The parts that are maybe a little bitchy, or the parts that are like, you know I don't know, maybe not so savory, and really like have those expressed too. Or the part of you that's like a total goofball, you know, that is about like honoring all of your expression. And I feel like God, there was a point I was gonna make about that. Um I lost it. I lost it.
Do you have a defined identity center in human design? Do you know the G center?
I don't know. I know
You don't
that I
remember?
I haven't, like, my head is not very
Undefined.
defined.
So in human design, the G center is like the center of like self-expression. And so
Yeah.
it's interesting as I'm hearing you talk, because people with an undefined uh, G center have this limitless way of expressing who they
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
And then I have it defined. And so it's interesting because people with a defined identity center we kind of tend to be more of the same in every space that we're in. And
Yes.
so it's interesting to me because I'm like, I feel like to me, like I feel like I'm myself, and I'm, for the most part, except for the parts that I'm like healing, I'm that way in every space,
Yes.
so it's
Yes.
interesting because yeah, I'm curious about that.
Yes. And I'm going to take a guess and say that it's not defined. Mine is not defined because even as a child, I had the feeling of being very different with different people. And
Mm,
people, I get that feedback too, like, oh, how you show up online is very different than how you show up in your relationships. It's true. Like, and I used to think as a kid that I was like, there was something wrong with me because I felt so like different parts of me would be expressed in different relationships. Yeah.
yeah, and it's totally correct for people with an undefined G center. Like you are, like that's one of your gifts. You're kind of meant to be a chameleon, but the societal message that we get is like, no, you should be sure of yourself. You should be the same in every space. You should, you should, you should.
Yes.
So this is how even like human design plays into our marketing, right? Um,
Absolutely.
like what are the ways in which we were told we like have to be,
Yeah.
but like I'll work with a client that has an undefined G center, and they're like, I don't really want to brand myself in like one way, and I'm like, then don't. Like that's not going to feel good to you. Like
Yeah.
what do we need to do? You still need to have some systems, and you still need to have a clear way of letting people know what you do. But it might be that you have like 3 podcasts and that's correct for you.
Every time you bring in the human design piece, I just feel my system relaxing. I feel like it gives me, and I believe it gives people such permission to fucking do it their own way.
Yes.
Really be themselves and to not be questioning themselves, right? Because and when you're out of that questioning space, when you kind of know, like, oh yeah, I have an undefined G center. I like it gives you permission to be like, I can be all sorts of ways, right? Then your consistency is gonna look inconsistent, right?
Right.
From one reel to another, it's gonna look inconsistent, but that's your consistency,
Yes.
right? Versus somebody else whose consistency looks like more similar each time.
Totally.
Yeah, I feel like it blows my mind every time you sort of bring that piece in. And I'm just like, yeah, wow, right? Because I'm not an expert on human design. I like it, but I only know sort of the very surface level of it. And even learning that I was a Manny Jenny, I used to try to force things. I used to get so frustrated, right? But like, I want it to happen now. And then I was like, oh, all I have to do is just fucking lean back and wait, and then like observe, and then like, take action when I saw like a certain number of things coming into my field, and then boom. And I was like, oh, that's easy. Okay, so it's not on my timeline, but I can deal with that.
Yeah. And it is, Karen Curry Parker, who's one of kind of like the big human design coaches. Something that I thought that she said that blew my mind is that, most human design types are meant to wait, yet we live in a world that
Yes.
doesn't teach us how to wait. It's the
Yes.
like go and the get it and the mindset. You show up to the mindset call, make yourself do it,
Yeah.
and really for me, what has brought me so much peace in my business is getting a part-time job when I needed one, so that I could wait, so that I
Yes.
could like trust myself and get to know, like how I show up and when something feels good and when something doesn't. So 2021, I like went back to work with my dad part-time, and it was like the best thing. And now in retrospect, I'm like, yeah, I was waiting.
Yeah.
I needed like some peace so that I could wait. And most of us need to wait. So
Yeah.
it can be hard to sell business stuff when it's not riding on the wave of like Black Friday's coming up. What's your sale? Like what's, like December is a huge sales month. Like what are it's like it can be
Yeah.
hard to like hop off that train. But the path is really beautiful once you do.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, such a good conversation, Pame. Thank you. So do you want to share a little bit about what you're going to be bringing to Harmonize so that people know?
Yes. So actually, sorry, hold on. Let me pull up real quick.
Yeah, the Excel file.
Yeah, this is helpful. Okay. So do you want to ask me again? And that way you can just like cut this part out.
Oh no, it's okay. We'll just
Okay.
whatever. Yeah, like what are you going to be bringing to Harmonize? Like what are people going to be getting if they
So
buy in?
yeah, so for me, my background is in brand strategy and business systems. I have a past life as a graphic designer, and became really interested in like coaching people about their branding when I realized that the things that they were like asking for was really like, how do I trust my voice? How do I like fall in love with what I'm selling? How do I show up even when it's, scary? And it had nothing to do with design. And so because of that, I started getting into leadership coaching and mindset coaching because I was like, okay, great. You're going to have a beautiful new website. What are you going to do next? Like
Yeah.
a website is like a beautiful house. Nobody's going to show up unless you invite them. So how are we inviting people, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I'm bringing that brand strategy, business perspective. And really what my gift is to help people simplify and build systems. I'm a very Taurian person. I'm very much about the like foundation. And what I find often, especially working with like healing type people or like creatives or people who are like so into their vision, is that I can help ground them and say, okay, here are the systems that we need to build. And so for the first month of Harmonize, we're really focusing on creating an offer. So for people to create an offer of something that like maybe they've been wanting to create, but have been feeling a little scared of what other people will think. I know for me, it was a huge shift when I went from designing, so handing people like a physical thing, to
Yeah.
strategy, because I'm like, now
Yes.
you're just paying me to talk. Like, that's so weird. That's not what I was trained to do. So helping people really connect with who they are and creating that offer.
Yeah.
And then the second month, we're really going to be focused on more of the like marketing piece of it, right?
Yeah.
So like, how do you talk about your offer in a way that represents you, but also that honors the person that you're trying to invite into your offer?
Mhm.
Like, so really getting to know like, who are they and what problem are you solving for them? And how can we communicate this in a way where people understand what it is?
Mhm.
Um, and here is one of my favorite things to do. I think this is where my projector ness really shines, because it's really easy for me to like hear somebody talk about something and I'm like, oh, okay, what if we said it like this? Or what
Yes.
if you worded it this way? Or like it's still too confusing. You're talking at a level 10 and your audience is at a level 3. Like we need to bring it down.
Yes. Yes. I remember being on a consult call with you and that being the most important thing I needed to hear.
And it can be really hard, like if you studied something for a long time or like are really passionate about it, like you just don't know what people at the beginning of the journey like don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's beautiful to work with a consultant, especially if they're not familiar with your thing, because I'm like, if you can explain it to me, I can help you explain it, but
Yes.
if I don't get it, then it's going to
Yeah.
be hard to like translate it.
Yeah. Exactly.
And then the last part, the last month, is really going to be about showing up for your offer, right? So how do you promote something enough times so that people see it,
Yeah.
get to know it? What type of decision makers are there? And like have the time to decide if that's a thing that they want, and how to keep showing up even when shit starts to feel really scary.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And I find that, I know that when I'm inevitably like our lives get in the way, right? I know that from the back end perspective of business, like when you're doing a launch, like your life doesn't stop. Like you may be going through a breakup or your child gets sick or you get sick, right? COVID, there's always stuff that's blowing up. How can we continue to show up in a way that feels congruent, that is like gentle, with like honors your body, and also like helps you continue doing the thing without blowing yourself out, without overwhelming yourself or reducing the overwhelm significantly. Yeah.
and how can you create systems that support you?
Yeah.
right? Like, like a big thing that I like to do is I like to do one Instagram post with all the details. And
Yes.
so even if I don't feel like making content, I'm like just resharing this post,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So how can you create systems so that your life can fall apart and things are still running, right? Like
Yes.
things are still happening,
Yeah.
that aren't dependent on you being 100% every day.
Yes. Yes. That is amazing. That
Do you
that
want
is
to? Oh, sorry.
that is so for me, that is so revolutionary, because I think that oftentimes I say we, I mean, I have done this in the past, I know a lot of people do this, is that we make it more complicated than it needs to be. Like we sort of like think our way into these knots, and we don't give ourselves permission to say like, oh well, I'll repurpose my content, or I'll just have that one post and share multiple times. We're like, oh no, it has to be new content all the time. Or no, people are overloaded with information, they can see it a couple of times, like it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it is. And I forget what the exact quote is, but it's like, it's from the book Atomic Habits, which is just talking about like building up habits. And it's like, it's something like we can only rise to the level of our systems or something, but really that's what it is. Like your systems, if you
Yeah.
have a system for things, then you can like ride on those systems. And coming from like this very like spiritual creative person, like I really love the idea of not having systems, because I thought it would feel free, like,
Yeah.
ooh, yeah, I can just say whatever. But it actually, I have learned that like having structure is like really helpful.
Yeah. Right. And the degree of structure you'll need will depend, right, also on your human design, on your preferences, all of those things.
It's
And
again finding that middle ground between like
exactly,
what's too many systems and what's too fluid, right? Like
exactly,
what do
exactly.
I need? And even what you need in different seasons of life will change.
Absolutely, absolutely. Right. Just how our boundaries change based on like moment to moment. Sometimes if we're tired, our boundaries will look differently than when we're feeling really nourished and really full. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you
So
want to share a little bit about what you'll be bringing into the
yeah,
space?
briefly. My back end, I like to simplify my back end systems. And I wrote an email, or I posted the other day about like, yeah, like I can teach you so much about trauma and about like emotions. I could do a whole 4-year training program on that. What I've used in my business is actually very simple, right? It is a mindset that allows me to move with and process and like release emotions, right? Like just waking up in the morning and tuning in and knowing like, oh, I need to move my body because I need to clear space so that I can like create. Right. So my back end systems are emotional fluency, mindset, both abundance mindset, like mindset that is like blocking out like all the collective trauma shit, like the 6 basic, you know, or typical collective trauma thoughts we tend to have, right? Like 6 categories. So I keep it really simple. Like I have categories, I have buckets, like, oh, you fit in one of the buckets. Okay, you need to leave. I'm going to replace you with something else that feels better to my system, that feels like that is actually aligned to what I want to be doing and how I want to be showing up. So there's emotional fluency, mindset, and pleasure. Pleasure isn't like a fluffy thing that I talk about. Pleasure is really like about nervous system soothing, right? It is about like just relaxing your body enough so that you are out of overwhelm, or that that you rest when you need to rest. It is like after you do a courageous thing, let's say you went live on social media, and you went live on Instagram, for example, and you said a thing that you've been wanting to say, but that felt super fucking high risk for you. You're going to want to get off that call, and you're going to want to be like really nice to yourself. Like maybe take a walk in a garden, if it's nice outside and there's flowers, like, just do something really nice for yourself to soothe your system, like reward yourself when you show up courageously. like that. It can be so simple. And if you have a long day of work ahead of you, maybe pleasure looks like having some flowers, um, putting a really soft blanket on your legs and having your favorite tea, making it beautiful for you, making it like lovely, so it can be really lazy, simple things to really like systemically supportive nervous system things, right? That actually like reduce the intensity of the anxiety that can come up after doing something big,
Yeah, no, and that's like, I feel like it's even just redirecting the way that we think about it,
Yeah.
because I mean, especially like the immigrant kind of narrative of
Yeah.
I'm meant to like force this thing through, or I'm meant
Right.
to like
Right.
work
Exactly.
7 days a week. And
Yes.
it's even just like a shift between like, you know what? I only have 2 hours worth of work today. I'm not
Yeah.
going to force myself to be on the computer for 8 just because I
Exactly.
think I should, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. This was such a good conversation. I'm just sort of like looking at my notes. I feel like we really covered a nice landscape. We gave people a really nice idea of how like all of the nuance, right? The human complexity that is part of business, and how, right, there's this systems, front end systems and back end systems that like we can marry and adjust to build a sustainable business. Because, right, like it's all about longevity, sustainability, and really like making it easy for us to continue showing up in devotion to our mission, to our business, to really like you say, creating the world that we want to live in through our business and our business practices.
yeah. And to me, it's like, I am the frameworks process queen. Like I will make you all the spreadsheets. You want a spreadsheet to like plan out your money or your content or whatever, I
Yeah.
got you. But
Yeah.
it's not about that,
Yeah.
right? Like it's a little about that and a little bit about intuition, but mostly about people learning to trust themselves.
Yes.
And that's what we hope people get out of this container. It is a very, like, the value will stay with you because that practice of getting to trust yourself and getting to be in devotion to yourself and to your business will carry on no matter what you do.
Exactly. Like they're getting practices. They're getting practices that, after the 3 months together, just continuing to practice that is going to build their system over time and is going to allow them to scale and grow their business over time.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So excited about this. Thank you so much, Pame.
Thank you.
Yeah.